Hi everyone, today I will be talking about how to make a research poster. So this is essentially the culmination of your group's research project for the semester. And I recognize that most of you probably have not created a research poster before, and you might never have seen one before, so that's okay. Normally I would bring a couple examples to class, but we'll just try to walk through some electronically today so you get a little bit of a sense of what this is all about. Basically, research posters are a way to communicate your research findings, and we use them a lot at scientific meetings. It's a nice way to provide a pretty brief snapshot of what you've done and give people really the main points of your research project. So you want to tell them, why you did what you did, what your hypotheses were, how you measured things, and what kind of analysis you did, and then what you found and what that means in the broader world of public health. So that's really the bottom line. It's kind of like a research paper just distilled down into its most important elements. And much like a research paper, we tend to structure them in a particular way. So I have a template here that App State created and I modified for this class. So if you click on the poster template under creating a research poster on our class website, it'll take you to this template here. And now it is a PowerPoint file, so it'll open up in Google Slides, but I don't find it very easy to edit in Google Slides. It's also not very easy to zoom in on it. So I'm gonna go ahead and download this poster and open it in PowerPoint just so I can show you what's in it a little bit more clearly. Okay, so let me move my Zoom toolbar out of the way. I know you can't see it, but there we go. So the first thing is a title and your names at the top. So make your title, pretty scientific. If you like to come up with catchier titles, feel free. There are, as I said, some examples we'll talk through, but it could just be, the association between X and Y among students at Appalachian State University. There's nothing wrong with that kind of title. So for the examples that I've done commonly in class, mine might be the relationship between being a parent and getting enough sleep among students at Appalachian State University. Or it could be the association between being a student athlete and experiencing depression. So whatever you want, your title can go at the top, and then just list all of your group member names here. I've already put in the template the public health program here at App, and so usually along with giving people's names, we also indicate where they're from, what institution they're affiliated with. Okay, so that's the easy part. And then we get down into the text of the poster itself. And so like I said, this is actually basically laid out just like any manuscript, any paper would be a research paper. So you have an introduction. I have a separate section down here where you can state your aim and hypotheses, because for class purposes, I don't want you to miss this part. And then you have a section for methods, a section for results, and a section for conclusions. I do also want you to include your references, and the acknowledgements part is optional, but I'll talk through each of these as we go. Other than acknowledgements, every one of the sections that's on this template is required. So the introduction, and I have within each section, I have the content of what you should be covering in the section. So the intro is just, why do we care about this topic? Why is it important from a public health perspective? And why is it important for college students? So you could put some information that you've found here from looking into the topic in the literature. You will probably have a couple of citations here in your introduction. For example, you might say, X% of students in college binge drink if your topic relates to binge drinking. Or X% of students experience anxiety or depression while they're in college. So you just want to have one or two data points that are the most relevant to your topic, and make sure you relate to both exposure and the outcome. So why do you think there might be a difference between the two groups that you're looking at? You want to keep this pretty short and succinct, but also professional. So make sure, I'll show you some examples of student projects as well. One thing that students often do that is not advised is, they say something like, we decided to focus on this because we are athletes or because we have had this experience. And so in this case, because this is aimed at a more scientific audience, that's not the kind of rationale we're looking for in the background. We want to know from a public health perspective, why are these important topics? It's nice that you have personal motivation, but this just isn't the place to write about it. Here you want to stick to what is it about being a student athlete that might put them at risk for negative outcomes. You also want to make sure you have some white space on your poster. So we won't get to print these out this semester, but typically you would print this out in a kind of 2 feet by 3 feet or 3 by 4 feet size, and you don't want to totally overwhelm people with information as they're walking by. So leave some white space. It's okay to use bullets. Don't do entirely bullet points, but it's okay to use bullets. In some places, make sure your font is at least a 28 point. On this poster, there's a combination of sizes, but mostly it's size 32 font. And again, we're not printing these out, but do make sure that you zoom in to look at things to make sure the alignment doesn't get off or that pictures don't look fuzzy, that sort of thing. Okay, so the next section is your aims and hypotheses. So here I just want you to clearly state, so the introduction kind of sets up your aims. So the introduction will be talking about why is it an important topic, what are we concerned about among college students, and then in the aims section you say, therefore the aim of our study, our project, was to investigate the relationship between X and Y. And we wouldn't normally do this in a research poster, but because this is for class, I want you to state the null and alternative hypotheses that you'll be testing as well, just so that's completely clear. Okay, so the next section is the methods. And here you are going to describe what you did and how you did it. So you've probably all written lab reports at some point in your life. Same idea here. You want to make sure that somebody reading this could decipher what you did, how you classified respondents, and they could replicate your work. So in particular, you want to mention the data source. So for everybody, that's the 2019-2020 Campus Wellness Assessment. You want to describe how you defined your exposure and your outcome. I typically prefer to just copy and paste the questions and the answer responses in. If you are in a situation where you use more than one question and it's kind of long and complicated, you could just shorten it and describe how you define things. You might think about using something like a flow chart if you have more than one question that defined your exposure. For example, some groups are using a question that was only asked of students who were sexually active, or it's only asked, like frequency of marijuana use is only asked if the person currently uses marijuana. So you want to be sure to specify if there's some subset of the population that was asked the question that you're using. So that should all be here. You also want to describe how you selected the variables that are in your regression model. And so for all of you, that should be based on your DAG. And so you don't need to include your DAG in the poster because it'll take up a lot of space and it's probably going to be hard for the average person to read. But you could just say something like, based on a directed acyclic graph, we adjusted our regression models for XYZ. And you also want to be specific about what kind of regression model you used. As we've talked about before, we only have qualitative data in this data set, and so logistic regression is what we're going to be using. We've done chi-square tests as part of the process of doing our research projects, and you don't necessarily, oops, sorry, I can't actually zoom from that view, so I didn't want to do that. You don't have to include the results of your chi-square test in your poster, but you can if you like. And if you do, just make sure you describe that you mention that you did a chi-square test in your methods. So the results is the next section. And this is probably going to be the bulk of your poster. So this template is laid out in 4 nice columns, but it's not usually the case that things fit very well into those 4 columns. So you can rearrange, move things around. Make sure you give yourself a lot of space to present the results. And my preference is that you try to do some figures if you can, just because they tend to be easier to read. But you can also include some tables, and I would like to see table 1 either as an actual table, or you could come up with a way of doing a figure to present the information that's in table 1. Remember that table 1 is what the exposed and unexposed groups look like, so some basic characteristics of those 2 groups. The one thing to note about posters is I don't need you to restate anything that's in a figure or a table in the text, so that'll save you some space. So for example, in table 1, you might decide that in the text you want to say our exposed group, our students who were parents, were more likely to be older and female and be employed. But you don't have to put all the percentages for those groups in the text, because you can just put in parentheses table 1, and that directs your reader to look at table 1 for those results. There are a few things that I want you to have in your poster, and the first one of these probably will be in the text rather than in a table, because it doesn't really fit in a table very well. So I want you to tell us how common both the exposure and the outcome were in the sample. So again, for my example, I would want to say, 8% of students were parents, and 50% of students got adequate sleep in the last week. So tell us, to start off, how often do these experiences happen? Because a lot of times students jump into presenting the results and talking about the differences between groups, but you want to give your reader a sense of how often things are happening overall to start, and then jump into the how do these different groups compare. Again, I do want table 1, so that's the exposed and unexposed groups, and then I want your regression results. So give me the odds ratio, confidence interval, and the p-value. You can report all of them if you're adjusting for lots of other variables, but be sure that the main thing that we're interested in is the relationship between that exposure and outcome. So make sure you have that clearly presented in your results section. Let's see. One other note of advice about tables and figures. So don't do a screenshot and copy it into PowerPoint, because it's not going to look very good. So make sure you're making it within here, or you're copying and pasting the actual table or figure over from Word or from another program. That should work fine. It's just when you do a screenshot that things tend to get really fuzzy and they don't look so nice. So you do want to make sure that it's legible. I have a few more recommendations here that I'll let you read later under the results section. And the last big section is your conclusions. So talk about what it means. What do your findings mean? So I don't mean just state the results again. Don't tell us the odds ratio here again from your results section, but say, there was no difference in sleep between students who were parents and students who weren't. Or say something like, student athletes were twice as likely as other students to experience anxiety. Whatever your result is, you can restate it in kind of general terms. You don't need to use the specific odds ratio language again, but tell us what the main takeaway is, and then what we should do based on those data. So do we need a new program? Does an existing program need to be expanded? What kinds of things have other institutions done to improve health among their students? And so this is the other place that you'll probably have some references, because I do want you to mention at least one evidence-based program or policy that we could implement or improve here on campus to address the issue that you've looked at. Now, you might not find any difference between those groups, which is often good news if there's no kind of disparity or difference between different groups of students on campus. But you could still suggest programs and services that might keep it that way, or that might be beneficial to students overall. The other thing you want to do in your conclusion section is highlight at least one strength and at least one weakness or limitation of your data. So was there something in your DAG that wasn't in the data set and so you couldn't adjust for it? Or would you have liked to have longitudinal data? We just have cross-sectional, a single time point in this study. So how could we make the study better, but also highlight, this is a large sample from this university, or maybe the measure that was used for your exposure outcome was a really good one. Binge drinking on this campus wellness assessment is defined in the same way that we define it on the behavioral risk factor surveillance system. So that's a strength. So think about what is particular to your group's research topic that you could highlight as a strength and a limitation. Finally, include a section for references. So you can make this font smaller here. And I recommend that when you cite it in the text, just use numbers. That takes up less space. So number your references and just refer to that number in the text. If you really run out of space and have problems fitting the references in, I can talk to you about ways to shrink it down. And the last section you might have on here is an acknowledgement section. So anybody who was involved in the study and was helpful, who isn't on the author list at the top, is somebody you can mention here. So I have an example. If you want to thank Dr. Howard in Wellness and Prevention, you could add that to your poster at the bottom. So that's the basic overview of what to put in your poster. And again, this exact template is posted on the class website, so you have access to that. I quickly want to show you a few other things that are posted on the class website. So the first two are examples of posters that I did in the last few years. And again, these are just, they don't show up perfectly in Google Slides, but you get the gist. So this one has a large, ugly table in the middle of it. So it would have been nice if I could kind of figure out a way to make more figures. Nonetheless, I just wanted to show you that I really do tend to devote most of my poster space to results. So all of that middle section and the smaller section over here are results. And then I did add a figure to show the percentages of different groups who had different characteristics. But you can also see everything I have is bulleted. There are complete sentences in here, but they're very brief and directed. And the one cheat that I often do is I don't usually include references in my poster itself. I'll bring them as a handout or have another file where people can refer to them. But again, for the purposes of class, I want you to get in the habit of making sure that you're citing things appropriately. So I do want you to include references on your poster. The other poster is similar to that one, similar topic. I did present results in a little bit different way on this one. So again, still a big table in the center, but this one kind of combined both the characteristics of the respondents and then the type of care that they were giving. So you can break up your tables and have kind of a bar in the middle if you want to present two different kinds of information. Again, I have a pie chart here instead of the bar chart that I had on the other figures. So pie charts are good. Just remember that they need to sum to 100%. So they only work when everyone in your sample is represented by only one category. And this was another project that I was involved with that was student-led. And the reason I wanted to include this example is because in this case, we actually had multiple regression models. And I think most of you will not have something like this for your project, but it's possible that you would. So for example, we were looking at both heavy alcohol consumption and binge drinking, two different outcomes. So we had two sets of regression models, and you don't always have to split things into two tables. Again, you can come up with creative ways to fit multiple pieces of information, multiple models into one table. So you don't have to have unique tables for each type of model that you've run. And also here we had some space that we dedicated to describing the measurement in a figure. So again, I recommended you might do something like a flow chart. In this one, this one's focusing on adverse childhood experiences, and there's 3 different types of adverse childhood experiences, each of which includes specific experiences. There were specific questions about them. So we felt like it was easier to explain that in a figure than to write all of it out in the methods. So that's another possibility. The last 2 things I want to show you are I have this sample poster that was okay for class and another version of it that was revised that was better. So you'll notice neither one of these is labeled as perfect, so they both still have some errors in them. But I think this is a good example of how you can, how you might start with a draft that's not great and move it into a much better product. I will be asking you to submit a draft of your poster so that I can look over it and give you some suggestions. So that's part of why I post these two versions here. So the first one, so they were looking at depression among student athletes, so not and student athletes. One change to the title there that might make it a little bit more clear. And this is one where you can see in the intro, they actually jump right into kind of some of the methods and how they defined things, and why they wanted to work on this topic. They kind of went towards that more personal explanation of why they cared about this topic rather than a broad public health one. You can see they have white space, but kind of an awkward amount of white space here. So I mean, give readers some space, but you can shrink your text boxes to fit the text that's in them or make the text within it bigger. You don't have to have identical text size across your entire poster. They did a good job of stating their aims and hypotheses. You can see the methods part, it has this kind of strange indent, so they're not really using all the space very efficiently. Not a lot of complete sentences here, so that is okay if you're going to bullet things, but it's a little bit hard to read and choppy if you just have random statements throughout. And then they did some things like repeating, so they already talked about the aim in the introduction, and they talked above about what questions they were using. So make sure you only have so much space, so make sure you're using it efficiently. And then you can see here, this table is kind of floating at the bottom and overlapping things, and it looks like a screenshot from another program rather than something they made within here. So it just doesn't, it's not very easy to read, not very well organized, and as I said, some of the comments are in the wrong category. So I'll let you read through that in more detail later. But as I said, I would just classify that as an okay poster. And then we did some revisions on that, and this is their final version. So they changed the title to Depression Among Student Athletes and Non-Athletes. They start their introduction out with, why do we care about this? So what's the prevalence of depression among college students, and why do we think athletes might be more prone to it than other students? You can see they made a nice table here within the program. It fits the text boxes above and below, now look similar, nothing's overlapping each other. They have subheadings within their methods section that are easier to see and read. They did some bolding, so we can actually see what's the exposure, what's the outcome, and what were the statistical methods used. So this is a much better fit with the kind of traditional structure that I talked about before, and it's easier to read, easier to look at. It's still relatively heavy on text, so it might be nice to compress this a little bit further. And as I said, there's a few typos and things in it, but overall, much better product than the first version. So I have guidelines here under the draft analysis poster about what you need in each section. And for the draft, I'll mostly be going through and seeing whether or not it's there. I'll be making comments, but I'll be grading more on the presence of each component than the quality of it. The exception being at the end, I do have a part that has to do with the design, including, the structure and how you created it. So you can lose points there if things are overlapping and hard to read. But mostly the draft is so I can give you some feedback. And then once I give you that feedback, then you'll be turning in the final version during finals week as your final poster for your group project. There are some other pieces to your group project. I'm going to post another video later talking about what you'll need to do, but it is down here. under the final data analysis project. So in addition to this final poster, you'll be giving me your Stata code and then doing peer evaluations. But as I said, I'll talk more about those later. So let me know if you have questions, and hopefully you can get started on your posters soon, and just be in touch along the way if I can help with anything. Hope you all are doing well. I will talk to you again soon.